Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. This is Brother Mushtaq, representing the Happy Strong Family team here within the studios of Masjid Dar al-Iman in Markham. It's been a while since I've been in this chair, and a lot has changed. Quite frankly, the world is hurting right now. Everyone is struggling, grappling with what to do in this current situation when people are dying left, right, and center. Specifically, let's not beat around the bush. We are talking about Palestine. So, with that being said, we have Sister Saadia here.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum salam, Sister Saadia. Thank you for joining the show. We're going to talk about how parents can talk about Palestine with their children. Even before going live, we were kind of discussing how do we kind of, tackle this topic. There is no right or wrong answer. I'll just reiterate that again for the entire audience. Really, I think because parents themselves are struggling, emotions are emotions, right? And I have heard repeatedly myself that some of the clips out there now, and we're all in an age of WhatsApp, things are just being forwarded. You are drawn to watch, but then you just immediately turn the video off because it is that painful, and you react, right? Your emotions are there, right? It's not like you can just switch them on or off. So how, as a parent, can parents deal with this? Because then they're the ones that have to kind of handle how their children are going to respond.
Yes, of course. And the thing, I think we underestimate just how much our children are continuously absorbing our emotions. Our emotional state, as I've said before on this podcast and elsewhere, is just the most fundamental aspect of parenting. And we don't think about that. We always think about parenting as something that you do, but parenting is something that you are, right?
100%,
and your
100%.
Kids are going to pick up and absorb your example more than anything. So the number one advice I have, and I've had tons of women reach out to me the last couple of weeks. I had one woman tell me she can't stop crying. I had one woman tell me she's not able to eat, that she's not sleeping. Like, there are people that are, one person told me they forgot to pick up the kids from school.
Oh my.
Yeah. This indicates a state of severe dysregulation, right? And like you said, people are struggling, and of course we should be struggling. Like, seeing these kinds of images, it's traumatic. And if you're not traumatized, something might be wrong with you. If you have a heart, you're going to be moved by these images. And unlike any other period in history, like, we've seen journalists break down live on the air, like, as they're reporting. Like, it's hard for people to stay neutral, and they shouldn't. But having said that, your first and foremost responsibility, of course, is to run a smooth home.
Yes.
And that includes towards your spouse, and that includes towards your children. So I guess my first advice would be get self-regulated, get regulated, right? And how that works for people varies. The first thing is to process your emotions, to make sure you're not like super anxious and fearful and angry in front of your children, but that they're seeing you calm. And I think one of the ways that I've been able to do that is to remember who's in charge. We have to, as Muslims, remember who's in charge. Allah is watching everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has everything within his grasp. He is witnessing. He is all hearing, all seeing. We have to have faith as Muslims that everything's unfolding according to plan. And it's not callous to say that. Everything's always unfolded according to plan. And just because you don't understand the plan, because you're located in one small snippet of time, doesn't mean the plan isn't unfolding exactly as it should.
Right.
So we have to remember that, and whatever it takes to remember that, to remind yourself of that, that's an active process. Like, for me personally, I just go back to the Quran. Like, every time I go back to my Quranic recitation, I can feel the calm, I can feel the sakina, I can feel, the reminders. And I tell myself, this is what Allah needed me to see today. This is what I was brought to, these exact verses. This is not a coincidence. It's not an accident. This is by design. And it helps me tremendously. For somebody else, it might be salah, I mean, it should be salah for all of us, like primarily. SubhanAllah, I've had many people reach out and tell me they've solidified their prayers.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, as a life coach, as an Islamic life coach, one of the things I do regularly is help women sort of fortify their 5 daily salah. A lot of Muslims struggle with that, right? And just, the blessings on the other side of doing that, subhanAllah, cannot be understated. But like at this time, so many people are like, okay, I'm praying exactly when the time comes in. I am so conscious of my fajr now. I'm getting up for tahajjud. Like, subhanAllah, we know, at the end of the day, we know the reality of turning to our Lord and what that does. And when you do that, and inshallah, the tawakkul that brings, the trust that brings, the faith that brings, that is what we need to be able to self-regulate, I think, right? Our faith will be fundamental to that process.
I've seen myself, just as an observation, coming into the masjid, that there are more congregants on the brother side.
MashaAllah.
People that,
no worries.
One of the offsets of being live on the air,
no worries,
you do get the occasional call. So in terms of just people turning to their salah, turning to their Lord, as you're saying, strengthening their iman, coming a little bit more deeper into their faith. Faith is one thing. What else can someone do when they're seeing just all of these atrocities on the media, clips being forwarded to them from onto your WhatsApp? Like, what else can someone do? I think let's just really like deconstruct this, do a further deeper dive into this. You know, it's alhamdulillah. Let's park that. Faith is one thing, without a doubt. And as Muslims, we are 100% rely on our faith. But what else can someone do? Perhaps from an emotional perspective, from a psychological perspective, from a meditative perspective, you know, all of these things.
So, I mean, the whole aim is to increase your capacity. You've got to know yourself. You've got to know what does that for you, right? So aside from the faith building practices that we've been taught by our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we've all got certain inclinations. Like maybe I'm a person that responds really well to exercise. So I've got to amp up that rigorous exercise, get those endorphins, get that blood flowing, right? Or maybe I'm a person that responds to writing and journaling. So I've got to go and use that as an outlet right now to help me process my feelings. It really depends on who you are and what gives you strength and comfort. I know a lot of people, because I talk to women all the time in particular, but men, I've talked to men about this as well. They don't know who they are. Like there's a lack of self-knowledge, like what really helps me. So that's maybe step one, is like you got to get to know what it is that helps you in particular during moments of crisis, during moments of weakness, during moments of sadness. And we all have those moments, no matter how strong your faith is, you have those moments of overwhelm. I mean, even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had that, right? He had a whole year of that. We literally call it the year of sadness. So that's nothing to do with the strength of his faith. This is somebody with the strongest faith on earth. But he had a year where enough things happened to him that you know, it affected his entire mood and personality. So what did he do? Let's look at his example. What did he do that year?
I'm really glad you said that, Sister Saadia, because you know, when it comes to mental health. Oh, thank you, Brother Christopher. So this also happens live on camera. You are handed a cup of coffee. Thank you so very much. Jazakallah. A lot of times, and I've been to multiple conferences, and alhamdulillah, our scholars have stepped up, and openly now said, rightfully so, that iman and mental health are connected. But having your iman can be at whatever level. You going through some form of a mental health situation, episode, it is by no means a question of your iman.
Yes, 100%.
Right? It does not mean that you have low iman, because that sometimes is a stigma in and of itself.
Yes.
That, and my God, how can you be going through this? Do you not have faith? Do you not believe in Allah? Do you not believe so and so and so, to the point where a person says, oh my God.
Yes. And that's a messaging that I've heard a lot from people I've talked to. They were always taught this. And I say, how can you believe this if you've read the Quran? How? I mean, we have we have many examples, so let's just think about one example. Yaqub alayhi salam literally cried himself blind over grief over Yusuf alayhi salam. Okay. This is a prophet of Allah. Are we in any doubt about the strength of his faith? Of course not. But what did he do? He turned to Allah. Right? He cried on the prayer mat and he literally said, I only turn to Allah with my grief. Like, this is where you will find, that is the source of relief. This is where you will ultimately find relief. That's where you'll ultimately find peace. I think many of us have, those of us who are, over 30, over 40, like once you reach middle age, you sort of have been through some moment of crisis in your life, some moment that's completely broken your heart. And what works ultimately? Nothing except Allah. Like, that's why so many people turn 100%. To God in moments of heartbreak, and non-Muslims included. That's why so many people embrace religion after something really traumatic has happened to them, because they tried other things.
Yes.
And it failed. It didn't work. It left them feeling empty. So, that's why there's so much regard in our religion for a young person that's growing up connected to Allah. Because when you're young, you don't quite understand this. You haven't been through enough sorrow and heartbreak yet, necessarily. And, sometimes I also think that if you have been through a lot of difficulty, our religion's stance is that Allah loves you and he's developing you and he's polishing you and he's connecting you. Because think about the Prophet again, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like he had a very difficult childhood by all accounts. Like it's not easy to lose your mother. It's not easy to grow up without a father. It's not easy then to lose your grandfather and then be shipped over to your uncle's house, and the poverty and all of these things that he dealt with. SubhanAllah, they were designed to develop him. And they were designed to make him sensitive and to make him open to other people's suffering and to make him capable of leadership one day. So this thing, and it translates in my advice to parents as well, like don't try to, there's a lot of toxic positivity these days, like let's just be positive no matter what. No, sadness is a valid emotion. Anger is a valid emotion. How do we sit with these feelings? How do we then deal with these feelings? Do we give them space in our lives, or we just try to suppress them and push them away? Because they're always going to come back.
So, Sister Saadia, this is a really good segue.
Yeah.
And it's coming back full circle, right?
Yeah.
So let's along the lines of doing that deep dive now, as a parent. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's by design. It's for a reason, right? Just to guide the discussion. Again, people are hurt. People are not able to process all of this.
Yeah.
Right? They're just not able to. People are emotionally shutting down.
Yeah.
At the masjid, we have had many people come forward to the imams, to whoever, and say, I'm crying. Like you're saying, you've had repeated calls of people saying, I'm crying nonstop.
I'm overwhelmed. Yeah.
So what can someone do to regulate?
Yeah.
You've touched upon exercise.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing, right? What else can they do?
I mean, so many things. One of the things that's been coming up a lot with my clients is, what time are you going to sleep?
Okay.
Yeah.
How is that connected?
Well, actually, lack of sleep is directly connected to lack of emotional regulation.
Oh.
Our brain is literally more reactive to things when we are sleep deprived. And people are online until 1, 2, 3 a.m. scrolling through videos. They're not going to be doing very well the next day.
Okay.
Related to that is, you shouldn't be watching these videos. We were never meant to see this amount of carnage and bloodshed. For most of human history, people lived in a village and they didn't even know what was going on in the next village. Right? So now we're in a situation where we're seeing all of this. It's traumatic. And we shouldn't be constantly exposing ourselves. That's actually harmful, right? And Islam prohibits causing harm to oneself. I would put this under that category. Watch the video so that you remain connected, and then take breaks. Watch a few videos, take breaks, right? If you're continuously consuming this, of course, it's going to affect your emotional state. If you're human and you're a feeling, thinking person in this world, of course it will. And that's not to say cut it off completely, because you don't want to lose your emotional connection to what's happening.
Right.
We don't want to become like overly detached. We don't want to intellectualize the problem. We do want to keep our this emotionally centered. And keep our connection to the suffering of those people, and
Right.
and remember that they're people like you and me,
Absolutely.
and what they're going through is horrendous. But of course, if you're constantly consuming, it's a big problem.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Well said. Yeah. That
And
I think there's
everybody's advising against that. All the therapists I've seen,
Okay.
every
Okay.
expert, like, you
Okay.
need to take breaks.
Yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive,
Mhm.
like, but it makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, then the follow-up question I get
Mhm.
about that is, women will say to me, well, am I not betraying the people in Gaza if I do that? That I
Oh,
just go back to my regular
goodness.
life and I
Okay.
just live, like nothing's happening? No. And my answer to that is no, because here's the thing. If a woman in Gaza could trade places with you right now, what would she do? She wouldn't sit all day watching videos. What she would do is she'd be on the prayer mat, right? She would be so grateful. Even if she could switch places with you for a day, her heart would be like consumed by gratitude.
Right.
And she would focus on her family. She would focus on, her husband, or if it's a man, he'd focus on his wife, focus on parents, focus on children, and focus on what really matters. And that's how they would spend their day. So then what are we doing, and what do we think we're solving by, consuming these traumatic images and videos 24/7?
Right.
It's not helpful.
Okay. Really good point. Sister Saadia. So we focused on exercise. Then a follow-up to that was basically not using your second screen, i.e. your phone.
Yeah.
Especially before going to bed, whether it's TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Reels on Instagram, you name it. Just do yourself a favor.
Yeah.
Don't do it. What else? What else can someone do during these very disturbing times?
So are we still talking about building individual capacity, or should we start talking about what to do as a parent?
Let's talk up, individual capacity with the lens on to the parent. And then let's transition to how that parent can help a child.
Okay.
Right? So just let's give max 2 more tips for the parent, because again, it's like that airplane commercial, right? Whenever you sit in a recent flight, again, I was recently in Morocco, so if I remember correctly, it was like Air Canada, Lufthansa, whatever, blah blah blah. Yeah. And as soon as you sit down, they run the commercial or the public service announcement video, and it's always the air mask. When that air mask part comes, it's always okay. As a parent, you put on your air mask first, then you put on the air mask for your child.
100%.
So the same analogy, if that example can be applied, as a parent, let's solidify and strengthen, fortify the parent first.
Yes.
So that then that parent can then help their child.
That's like my entire approach. And that's my work. That's my work, like my life philosophy. Absolutely.
All
right. Like that's actually why I got into the work I did. I was an educator. I was a teacher. And when I would do parent-teacher interviews, I would understand that the students that are struggling the most come from families where the parents are struggling the most. That would be a very quick connection for any educator to make. And so this idea was always in the back of my mind, like, these parents need more support. They need more. We are not doing enough as a community. A lot of people are feeling very isolated, overwhelmed. They're detached from their faith, right? And this is like both within private school and Islamic school that I felt this way. And so that's what got me into my work. Like, let's start building the capacity of parents so that they can better hold space for their children. So like, if we're talking about things to do, nutrition, exercise, sleep, like just the basic physical things are the first things you have to take care of after you set your spiritual foundations, right? After that, we've got to learn some tools for emotional self-regulation. We have to be able to sit with our feelings. We have to find outlets that work. For one person, it might be meditation. For another, it might be writing and journaling. For a third person, it might be sort of like just sitting and crying to Allah in dua. And that really depends. And it could be a combination of all of these things. Like that, a lot of people have told me tahajjud has been very helpful to them during this time. The sakina, the peace that comes with tahajjud. I mean, anyone who wakes up even once in a while for tahajjud knows all about that feeling. That's not something we can explain, right? And then movement doesn't have to just be exercise. Just getting up and going for a walk in the woods, taking your kids with you. This is or going outside if you don't have a wooded area near your house. Like, this is doable, this is small, it's actionable, and it'll make a huge difference to your mental health.
Connecting with the outdoors.
Oh, 100%. Like, this is so important to me personally. I'm constantly promoting this. I don't think we were meant to stay indoors, right? For most of human history, we didn't. And so this is another thing that we've lost, is our connection to the cycles of the sun and the cycles of the moon and the sky and the trees and the birds, and being able to, really connect with nature in that deep way, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly calls upon us in the Quran to reflect on his signs. This is what he's talking about, right? Of course, some of the signs are within ourselves, but a lot of the signs he's talking about are signs that are observable in the natural world. So how many of us go for regular walks, right? And if you do so for the sake of Allah, like your intention really is that I'm doing this for the sake of Allah, or I'm doing it to follow the sunnah because the Prophet used to do this regularly. Now you've reaped mental health benefits, and you've also connected what you're doing to reward, right? And ideally, we connect everything we're doing to being rewarded. Nourishing your body, like that's really not talked about. A lot of parents tend to skip meals, or they like eat junk, whatever's fast, whatever's convenient. That's going to affect you over time.
Right.
If you want to be able to be at your best, you've got to eat good, nourishing food. So simple things, nothing that complicated. And then, of course, we have to, if we're self-regulated and working on ourselves and loving ourselves and pouring into ourselves, then the next plan of action is, what are you doing with your relationships? And that means, first and foremost, the people in your household, right? In Islam, that's the emphasis, family. That's, and you all understand that. That's literally what this podcast is about, right? You start with your family. What are we doing to create harmony in our homes, in our immediate environment, our friends, our immediate community? That's the number one priority.
Right.
So we have our global concern, of course, and that's in our circle of concern, but most of us are never going to be in a position to do anything to change that directly. What we can do is within what's our control and within our power, inshallah. And that is to work on yourself, to work on your family, your immediate vicinity, and then, of course, you donate. You give generously, and you involve your children in that donation as well. You advocate, so you use your voice to speak up wherever you are, like if a social media platform, in real life, maybe talk to your neighbors like about what's going on. Like don't be shy. Like I've only talked to one neighbor so far, but they were completely sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and I wouldn't have known that if the conversation hadn't happened. Right. And connected to this is another point that I want to make.
Okay.
Doing the right thing and speaking up for truth and justice within our circle of influence, within our circle of control. So how many of us know a situation of maybe oppression or injustice occurring amongst the people we interact with most often, and we stay silent about it, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to speak out. And if we can't change something with our hand, to change it with our voice. And if we can't change it with our voice, then to change it by feeling bad about it and to make dua for it. And we all are aware of something within our family or relatives or group of friends where there's like some kind of injustice going on. What are we doing about that? Have we said anything? Have we ever advocated on behalf of the weak or oppressed person in our immediate circle? Because I'll tell you, kids respond really well to their parents doing the right thing. Even when it's hard, even when it pinches, even if your voice shakes, your children will respect you so much, because subhanAllah, they're on the fitra when they're born, right?
Yes.
And they're closer to fitra than we are. We've been more corrupted by this dunya. So for lack of a better term, they have a stronger BS meter. They understand, like if you've ever watched preschoolers play, they know what's fair and what's not fair behavior. It's programmed in them, and they will yell out when someone does them an injustice, like snatches their toy, right? They understand this inherently, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put that in us to recognize injustice when it happens, to say something when we witness it happening. So because our children recognize that, if they see us consistently not speaking out, that's a problem.
Yes.
They're going to start losing respect for us. They're going to feel like this person's words and actions don't match up. They want to see their parents working with integrity in the world.
Right.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of connected ideas there, right? But if you're a lover of truth and justice, what are you doing to establish truth and justice in under your immediate influence, like the people that are in your control or influence?
Even like we were discussing, Sister Saadia, off air about the dramatic spike in Islamophobia, incidents of Islamophobia,
Yeah.
the dramatic introduction and rise of anti-Palestinian racism. Yes, that's a term which never before was part of the average lexicon. It just wasn't a term. It is now.
Yeah.
So if you see any incidents amongst your circle,
Yeah.
there's definitely, you know, there are organizations that are doing what they can to fight the good fight on that, such as NCCM. Producer Kashif has given me the signal for questions from the audience, and this might be a good segue.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is an
so much more to say.
Oh boy, you
Hopefully
have,
it comes up.
It will. You have the full hour. So, Producer Kashif, what are some of these questions, comments?
Yeah, actually, it's related to what we're talking about. So he came in, so I think we'll ask this kid. So they were saying, great topic. Thank you to team and guests. May the reward. Then went to ask a question. I worry about my school going children, as them saying free Palestine, like the poster had on it. I guess we had that on the poster. It's incorrectly classified as hate speech. I struggle for them advocating for justice within their circle.
Yeah.
Versus the fear of their safety. So as you know, both of you being parents, like of kids in quite a range of age groups, you guys both have also, from young to high school. So what advice would you give to this parent about, you know, that fear? Like every parent must have it. Like they want their children to stand up, but they're also afraid what could happen if their children stood up.
Yeah, Sister Saadia, please go ahead.
Being courageous is never going to feel easy. And this is something we need to tell our children, right? When it was, and they will recognize this because they're taught about slavery in school, and they're taught about colonialism in school, and they're taught about bullying in school. So what we're doing is we're against bullying, and we're against colonialism, and we're against racism. And so the first thing I would teach them to do is, you've got to be courageous. As Muslims, you have to speak for the truth, no matter who it's for or who it's against. It's not just that we're Muslim and that's why we support Palestine. That's one part of it. The other part of this is that as Muslims, we support justice, and we stand for and with the oppressed, whether they are Muslim and whether they are not Muslim. Right? So we've got to teach our kids, and they'll understand this because they talk about anti-bullying all the time in their schools, right? So one thing I always tell my kids is if something ever happens in front of you, for example, and the principal or teacher calls upon you to say what happened, you've got to speak the truth. Even if it's your best friend that did the oppressing in that situation and bullied the other kid, you've got to speak the truth because Allah is watching, right? You can't, and that goes counter to some of the things they hear about, oh, don't be a snitch and all of this. But this is about being Muslim, and being a Muslim means you stand up for truth, you stand up for justice, you stand up for the oppressed and the weak in every situation. And by the way, that's what attracted so many people to Islam, right? The Prophet ﷺ stood up for the oppressed. He stood up for the weak and marginalized members of society. And it wasn't easy. Like, we've got to be courageous, and we've got to be willing to teach courage to our children. And courage doesn't feel easy necessarily, right? Not everything's going to be easy. But having said that, if the school or the school board tries to impose any kind of restriction, we do have organizations, and we have, things in place. And definitely talk, if you face any pushback or discrimination, definitely contact those organizations, right? And we have rights. It's not like we don't have rights. So I mean, I don't want to say your kids are fine, your kids are safe, because it is a pretty charged environment at the moment. And all it takes is one crazy person, as we saw in Chicago or in Texas, right? Astaghfirullah. But having said that, our schools, I think, are quite committed to keeping the student body safe in Canada. And as far as I know, while the rhetoric is more charged, there hasn't been much. Maybe I'm missing something. Has there been any like physical violence against Muslim kids? Right. I will say this: Muslim kids should not go around trying to provoke anybody. Yes. And for this, they need to have a strong, calm, educated approach. We're not here trying to yell at anyone, scream at anyone, no anti-Semitic remarks. It goes completely against our religion, right? So we have to teach them what those boundaries are and and for that, we have to be confident in understanding the history of this region so that we can confidently explain it to our children. We don't want to just leave them out there. If we're unregulated and we haven't talked to them and then we're just pushing them out, go speak up on behalf of Palestine, something could go wrong and they might not be representing our viewpoints or the viewpoints of the vast majority of Muslims if they don't have that guidance along the way.
As parents, we 100% need to support our youth, need to support our children. Just as an example, my daughter goes to Bill Hogarth here in Markham.
My son goes there too.
She's the president of the MSA. She's the only Niqabi in the school, so she's very, very, very visible. Alhamdulillah, and I have to give her full credit. She took on the decision of wearing the niqab all by herself.
Wow.
And I commend her for her constant bravery in the face of what is happening right now. That all being said, our youth do need guidance on what to say and what they can't say. And you've already touched upon this, Sister Saadia. In terms of anti-Semitism, that's a no. Unequivocal no. Plain and simple. But that does not stop anyone supporting Palestine. That does not stop anyone within schools, be it elementary school, high school, or even in the workplace, in supporting Gaza, in supporting the West Bank, in supporting the people of Palestine overall.
Yeah.
Why? Because, as we're all saying in different ways, we are against an occupation.
Yeah.
We are against people dying.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. The narrative for now has been along the lines of a geopolitical axis, that this is, and yes, I was in Ottawa as of late. I was there 2 Thursdays ago, meeting with various ministers and MP, part of a NCCM delegation representing the masjid. And yes, I heard from all 3 different parties, well-known, well-beloved to Canadians. And all 3 of them said in different ways, this is a complex issue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is not a complex issue. This is an issue of people dying. Do you support war or do you support peace? And that is the narrative.
Yeah.
And I repeat again, and I do this thing where I look straight into the camera. This is where we need to change the narrative.
Yes.
So that every Canadian, regardless of race, religion, background, ethnicity, they will all support peace. And I challenge you, who will openly support war? The majority of Canadians will simply support peace. And this is where we, as Muslims, have to guide the discussion for our youth and for anyone out there. And quite simply now say, this is all about peace.
Yeah.
Peace is the keystone,
Right.
the foundation to everything else.
Absolutely.
Everything else. Without peace, you can't have anything else, plain and simple.
Yeah.
So that's the dialogue, that's the narrative, that's the discourse, full stop. Once peace is established through an immediate and permanent ceasefire, then inshallah, everything else can be built on top.
Yes.
It's not a complex situation.
Yeah.
It's not something that is far removed from us being here in Canada.
Yeah,
No. People are dying left, right, and center. Okay. So why not focus on a narrative of simply bringing peace about in the world?
Yeah, and that's interesting you talk about that too, because even with my own children, there was, and I'm talking specifically about my 16-year-old and 12-year-old, there was a little bit of a misconception. And they were like, why aren't Muslims and Jews getting along? And I'm just like, whoa, wait a minute. Muslim people and Jewish people have gotten along for centuries, and they've lived with each other, and even in Palestine.
Definitely.
And did you know that when the Holocaust was happening, Muslims gave refuge to Jewish people, and they spoke out against it? Like, we have tremendous respect for the people of the book. It's in the Quran again and again, right? And our men can even marry Jewish women. Like, so there isn't this hatred towards Jewish people. And then I really had to deconstruct with them the difference between Judaism and Zionism. And I had to really get into, how that political nationalist movement is differentiated from Judaism. But nothing was more powerful for them than attending the protests the last couple of weeks and seeing live that the people at the protest are not all Arab and they're not all Muslim. We have people from a wide variety of backgrounds. We had Native American people, we had Black people, we had Chinese
100%,
people.
100%.
And then the most surprising, especially to the younger children, was that there were Jewish people, not just attending, but at the leadership positions of our protests,
Yes.
standing up against what is happening.
Yes.
And these are people that, like, I really admire them for standing up for truth and justice, even though I'm sure they face tons of backlash from their own community. To me, that is somebody worth admiring. That is the definition of courage, right?
Definitely.
And then standing side by side with people like that and talking to them. And, one of them gave one of my children a snack. Like, it was really nice. And it helps children to see that this is about humanity and what's right and what's wrong versus something that's clearly wrong. Like, there are a few handful of people that are still justifying the death of 12,000 civilians.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, people will not justify that. They don't consider it justifiable. They don't consider it okay, right? Especially if they're going after Hamas, and it's like 13 people from Hamas have died. Meanwhile, 12,000 civilians have died, and then they're also targeting people in the West Bank. I mean, the narrative just doesn't match up. And like you said, that we need to shift the narrative, because right now, a lot of people are like, well, if you criticize Israel's policies, you're automatically an anti-Semitic person. And we need to challenge that. It's simply not true, right? And even the word Semitic is problematic because Arabs are Semitic people as well, subhanAllah. So that's not really it. So we do need to talk about that with our children, especially if your children are older. Obviously, like a 6-year-old is not going to grasp that. But with a teenager, 100%, that should be part of the conversation.
And with our children, and just to tie off on the intended question, with my daughter, they did, through the MSA, hold a rally, a walkout.
Yes. My son was part of that. Yeah.
So,
subhanAllah. Excellent.
And one of the kids took an Instagram reel of it. My daughter sent it to me, and it was a peaceful rally.
Yeah.
And again, this simple message was the demand for an instant, permanent, and immediate ceasefire, plain and simple. Now, again, did the school provide a notice to the parents? Yes. Did the school provide police so that they would at least monitor and just be in the background and do what every police officer does and just maintain the peace and order and all of that? Yes, the school did that as well. So to that parent that asked, well, their child might be in danger, or maybe there's some concern or some overriding fear, that should not be the case. And if that is, then please, please, please speak with the school administration, speak with the principal, speak with the vice principal. If you need to escalate, you can always speak with the school trustee. The schools should and are, and again, I repeat, should be nonpartisan. They should never take a side. Never take a side. Students have every right to express themselves, but they should never take a side. And if that is the case, there are advocacy groups that you can file an incident report through Justice for All Canada. You can file an incident report through the NCCM, which is the National Canadian Council, National Canadian Council of Muslims, which has a legal team, which will do what it can to look after that incident report. So that's just a very long-winded way of saying that students do have the right to have any and all peaceful rallies. Producer Kasha, let's get to the next question, please.
Yeah, so before the podcast, we had put out a call out for questions, and I'd also compared questions to what our parents struggling with, what our children struggling with, and there was a name you mentioned there that came up a lot in the questions was Hamas, right? Obviously, there's a propaganda machine at work where this is all justified because of the actions of a select few, and so children and parents are sort of confused on how to talk to their kids about this, right? Is because a lot of people will glorify what Hamas did, where the prophet teaches an innocent life is an innocent life, right? And really, this has nothing to do with that. Anyways, like well before Hamas, people were occupied and were, a genocide was occurring. So this is something that parents are struggling with, and children are struggling with, because obviously they're seeing one thing in the media, and what's the correct narrative there, and how should parents talk to their children about this difficult topic?
And did you want to go ahead first?
So with regards to any kind of group, Hamas, again, as Muslims, we never support any form of violence. We never, ever support any form of injustice or killing. So in terms of having that difficult discussion, yes, it's a difficult discussion to have.
Yeah.
In that, to tell your child, look, this is happening in part because of the actions of a few. Then the child will say, okay, well, why is an entire government taking this action, right? It leads to a larger discussion.
Yeah.
And then we as parents have to be careful, because again, that government is a government. Sister Saadia, would then guide that discussion to say, okay, if a government is taking this particular action against a group of people which are being occupied, the Palestinians, then what can we as Canadians do?
Yeah.
Right? That's potentially how I would guide the discussion. But Sister Saadia, I'm open to hear thoughts, please.
Yeah.
Because again, we're keeping this in the realm of how can we guide our children? Obviously,
absolutely.
children are hurt, children are very fragile, children are very sensitive, impressionable.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, look, first of all, the Quran is very clear. Like, even one innocent person being killed is completely wrong, right? So we condemn the murder of even one innocent person. Doesn't matter what their background is. I will say that with my own children, I've sort of guided the discussion along the lines of, if a government is on one side, like you were saying, right, and a group is on the other side, a very small group, this situation warrants an investigation and should be treated as a crime. Okay? So if it's a crime, what we would normally do under international law, under the law of any country, is we would investigate what exactly happened. That would be step number one, right? Step number two is you deal with the actual perpetrators once there's an investigation and it's found who did what. What we're seeing now is collective punishment. And this is wrong even according to secular international law. This is wrong even according to the rules of war, agreed upon internationally by the UN. So how can we support that? It's unsupportable, right? It's like, and I give them analogies, it's like if somebody went around doing a school shooting, which unfortunately is very common in the United States right next door, and we just bombed the whole school. Would that ever be okay? It wouldn't be okay. So we have to be very clear. Like, if an October 7 happened and there were people that made it happen, and we have to, first of all, we have to find out what happened exactly. There has to be an investigation, and that's the Quranic approach as well. Don't just believe things. We have to do an investigation. We have to do a thorough investigation. And once we've reached some conclusions and there's credible evidence of what happened, and we've sort of defined who did what, then the people should be held accountable. There should be consequences. But what's happening right now is an entire strip of land with, the size of the population of Toronto is being punished. I want you to imagine if like one neighborhood in Toronto did something, and now all of a sudden, because of that group, all of Toronto was being bombed,
Right.
right? And schools being bombed, hospitals being bombed, refugee
Universities.
camps, universities, most recently, churches. On what planet would that be okay? It wouldn't. So we have to keep reminding people of that, and then we have to explain that to our children as well, so that they don't get confused, because the narrative can be very compelling, right? It's packaged a certain way, the mainstream narrative. So we have to keep reminding ourselves, we have to keep strengthening each other, and we have to keep telling our kids, no, whatever happened does not justify this.
Absolutely.
It is horrific, and it is completely against not even Islamic rules, it's against international rules. Like nobody's okay with this. And I can give you a small, and I heard this the other day, and it really helped me put it into perspective. If Hamas was in an Israeli city right now, or Israeli province right now, would the Israeli government ever do this to defeat Hamas? Would they start bombing schools in Israel? Would they start bombing hospitals in Israel? Would they start bombing, churches in Israel? Of course they wouldn't. It would be appalling. And the international community would be like, oh my God, what is happening? This is crazy. So the question you have to, and this is something to do with your older children, the question to ask here is, in what ways have we also dehumanized the people living in this part of the world, so that we've become a little bit used to their death and suffering?
Absolutely.
Because we would never be okay with it if it was another part of the world.
Right. We've become completely desensitized
Yeah.
to the point where openly, look at any news channel. They will tell you internet has been cut off for a while now.
Yeah.
Okay. Water, electricity. When another government can come in and shut down your critical infrastructure,
Yeah.
your power,
Fuel,
your communications, your fuel, what kind of world are we living in? And we need to
barbaric.
kind of do that self-regulation to kind of check ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is why we are seeing more and more protest. Even just yesterday, I heard that for the first time ever in Washington, D.C., it was the largest crowd on record in terms of a rally for Palestine, for the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
So if this is happening in Washington, D.C., no less, then people wake up.
No, the majority of the international community sees what this is. And I think I will also add that, as somebody with a specialization in genocide studies, like I started using the word genocide early on, and some people reached out and they took issue with it. They said that it's not a genocide. And so on my page, I was quite explicit. I posted the definition of a genocide, and I said, here's all the ways that it fulfills the criteria. And the toughest thing to prove in genocide is intent. But we have plenty of evidence from the words of Israeli leadership of what their intent is here. And it's not necessarily to root out Hamas. So we, as Muslims, we should be courageous in being able to call it what it is. And we should also speak to, everyone within our circle of influence, and also help them to understand this as what it is. It is a genocide. And the intention isn't Hamas, although that's what's repeatedly said.
Producer Kashif, do we have any further questions? Any more questions? And this is a very deep topic. And again, it's really meant to help both parents and children kind of understand how to better deal with their emotions.
And also some of the common concerns. So the follow-up question that came up and that was submitted to us was that, why don't the people of Gaza just leave? Like, kids are asking that, right? And why don't the Muslim countries around them just take them and stop this? So as parents, how can we sort of respond to that one? Because this is something even my kid asked, 6 years old, and when I'm trying to explain the situation to him, it's like, why don't they just leave?
Yeah. Sister Saadia?
The Palestinians have a distinct culture and heritage. It's not that all Arabs are exactly the same. I think we tend to lump them into one category, but Palestinians had their own unique Arabic culture, right? And we have to remember that. You can't just ask people to get up and leave. Like, that's just not fair. Like, imagine if somebody came to your house right now and asked you to get up and leave. And The analogy I gave to my kids for this was my last name's Khan. I'm a descendant of Genghis Khan. Okay. Now, he was around 900 years ago. Imagine if I decided that I can now go and take over people's houses in Mongolia, and I can kick them out, and I can just be complete, like it's my land. That's where my ancestor is from. This helped them to understand just how ridiculous it sounds, right? And then if I went to Mongolia, imagine if I told the people, well, why don't you just go to one of the neighboring countries? They have a distinct culture. Their culture is tied to the land, right? So that's sort of like in an age where we pride ourselves as being past colonialism and past all of these horrific incidences of the past, like slavery and all this, we shouldn't be telling people that this is okay. It's not okay. And the thing I hear as a follow-up to that as well, there was no Palestine. Yes, there was. Go look at any world map. Look at the speeches of world leaders. They had distinct coins. They had distinct stamps. There were books written about Palestine. So to erase a people, I think, is one of the worst things you can try to do. And we've done that a couple of times in history, haven't we? And then we regret it and we say sorry and we commemorate it on special days of the year. But now we have a situation unfolding right in front of our eyes. So it's very easy to condemn the past, but what's much harder to do, requires a lot more courage, is to condemn something happening right now that we can see is wrong.
100%. So, Sister Saadia, let's flip the script. As I mentioned, recently I was in Ottawa as part of an NCCM delegation. And on the way, Imam Nabil and I made a stop in Kingston at the good old Tim Hortons. Okay. And a person in line, I'll just say a fellow Canadian, kept looking at me, and I'm like, oh boy, okay, I know what's going to come up next. I used to experience this growing up in the 80s, but hey, time check, it is 2023. But lo and behold, that particular conversation raised its ugly head, and he just blurted it out, "Where are you from?" And automatically, because this is who I am, and I've said this many times on this podcast. Yeah, I'm from Markham. And he's like, no, where are you from? And I'm like, originally from Mississauga. Because it's not entering my frame of mind, like that he's really trying to get at the root as to basically, where are my parents from? How come you are brown in color and you don't have the very typical trope of having that Indian accent? Why, yaar? Okay, well, bro, I was born and raised here in Canada. That's why I'm first generation Canadian. My kids are second generation Canadian. And yes, Canadians come in all different colors and shapes and sizes, including this shade of brown. So hello. And he did ask me that obvious question. He said, well, where are your parents from then? And I go, yes, they were from India. They came here in the 60s. I was born here in Canada. And he's like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I won't even, unfold the rest of the story. That's probably, for another podcast another time. So if I, as a Canadian, were already kind of to this fellow Canadian, so can you imagine for a fellow Canadian to basically, which I had one time growing up in the 80s, we were in Cambridge. My parents were we were all on our way to Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
And a fellow Canadian proceeded to tell me, as I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, go back to where you came from. And again, I was crying in the car. I was like, what does he mean by that? What does he mean by that? Go back to where you came from. Where is that?
Yeah.
So can you imagine being told as a Palestinian, now I'm connecting the dots here. Okay.
Yeah.
As a Palestinian, go out of your own country, out of your own land where you've been there for generations. I'm saying generations, never mind being a first or second, generation Canadian. I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So if I'm already if I've already cranked up my own dial here, and I'm like, you know what, Mushtaq, dial it back, dial it down. It's okay. It was just one uninformed, fellow Canadian. Let it go. But can you imagine an entire
I can.
army bombarding you,
No.
blowing up hospitals, blowing up universities, blowing up churches, blowing up masjids, and saying, get out of your own land?
Yeah. I mean,
So-
their faith is just so strong. I can't imagine, to be honest with you.
Again, it's a simple narrative that
Yeah.
we as all Canadians can get behind.
Yeah.
And I'm going to repeat it. Peace and not war. Peace and not death. Peace and not killing.
Yep.
It's really that simple. Do not tell me this is a complex issue. Do not tell me that this is a geopolitical issue that only governments can solve and, Canada has no power. No. We all need to do our part.
Oh, yeah. That's one thing we didn't talk about is writing to your elected representatives and making your children part of that as well. I mean, they are supposed to be
please do tell.
representing us, right?
Please do tell us.
We are in a democracy, right?
Absolutely.
Still,
Let's use our last few minutes to kind of really bringing home the point that every one of our children, whether they be first generation Canadian, second, or even third, as my own grandchildren will be, inshallah, that there will all be voting citizens of this dear nation of ours, of the land we call Canada, of our home, of our Canadian home. Every one of our children and our current children. Oh, it's okay. We're
Sorry.
live. It's okay. It's the azan. For anybody who doesn't know, it's the azan. It's the call to prayer.
It's from my phone.
All good.
Sorry about that.
So, Sister Saadia, let's kind of bring it full circle.
Yeah.
Our children, because that's what this topic was about, how can they write to their future political caucus? How can they write to their future political leaders? Never mind that political leaders have a set time frame.
Yeah.
Forget it. These are all future liberals, future conservatives, future NDPers. That's it, plain and simple. How can we engage our children?
I mean, I don't know about that, right? I think because we fall into these left-right binaries very quickly as Muslims.
Okay.
And Islamically, we don't fit neatly into that box. Okay. So we've got to, I think, invest in candidates that actually represent our views. But in order to do that, we have to really firmly know what our views are and really tease them out and understand what it is that we believe as Muslims, what are the issues that are actually important to us, and then vote as one unified entity, right? And I think we're still finding our way with that. The community is relatively young, right? So this is not something that happens automatically and overnight. It requires development. It requires internal dialogue. And that's something we need to work on as a community, right? I think in our parents' generation, I'm like you. My parents came here in the 70s and I was born here. Our parents' generation, they just voted liberal. Like they didn't even think about it, right? But I think we have to think a little bit more deeply about what that means. The politics of Canada have changed a lot in the last 15 years. And are we really aligned to our best interests when we just say this is who we vote for? I think it requires some introspection as a community for sure. But what we can do, like what we're empowered to do immediately, of course, is to write to and call the people that are elected to represent us.
Yes.
And what they're interested in more than anything is their power and holding on to their power, right? So they will, especially here in Canada, where the constituencies are quite small.
Yes.
If enough people call and write, it'll make a difference. Don't think it won't.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
And it'll make a person start questioning. Now, I can tell you this. One of the wisdoms of this entire tragedy has been people have gone and read the Quran, people who would have never picked up a Quran.
Yes.
Another thing is people have gone and educated themselves. They're told often as an insult, go educate yourself. Okay, I'm going to spend a couple of hours and educate myself. There's volumes written. There's UN reports you could educate yourself with, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, not just Muslim sources. Go educate yourself. Read books. Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky come to mind, Ilan Pape. Once you do a little bit of research and educate yourself, a lot of people are coming on to the side of supporting the Palestinian cause.
Supporting peace.
And that's exactly it. So we want to encourage that. And if you feel a little bit shaky or not confident, you have the power to read about this and deepen your understanding so you can be more confident when you talk to your children.
Yeah.
Another thing about kids I do want to say is when we say talk to your children, this is a caveat because I've had a couple of conversations around this week. The conversation shouldn't be longer than 20 minutes, like just for practical purposes. You have to look at your child's capacity, listen first, validate, hear what their thoughts are so you can respond and cater to their particular, thought process or challenges. And also age appropriate, like 0 to 7, keep it very light. Don't show them images. Astaghfirullah, they're not ready.
Right.
We have to protect our children.
Right.
Older kids, you can start having more sophisticated and complex conversations. And also talking about like the future history of that region of the world, right? Which is part of our belief. And with younger kids, what I would do is storytelling, a lot of storytelling. We have amazing stories in the Quran to help put all of this into context. The story of Musa alayhi salam,
Right.
story of David and Goliath. What else? A lot of the stories of the prophets are about a small band of elitists and how they viewed the world or how they ran things versus an oppressed or marginalized community and how they were trying to stand up to them.
Well said.
Yeah. So, I mean, that story runs deep in our narrative, and there's other storybooks as well. One that comes to mind is, have you heard of Gardens in Gaza? No, it's Ruqayya's bookshelf.
Okay.
She didn't write it, but she's the publisher. Gardens over Gaza, and I'm forgetting who the writer is. My apologies. It's a great little book for books for children to understand, younger children. So storytelling is the method through which we can help our younger children understand and also get firmer in their solidarity with like a global Muslim community, their understanding of their part, that they're part of an ummah, like a global community, a family of believers. Right. And when, as we know, the Prophet said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when one part is hurting, the whole body is in fever.
Yes.
Right. So we want to also build up our children's identity so that they feel that sense of solidarity with fellow believers wherever they're suffering. Right. But even larger than that is just our investment and interest in humanity. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to be witnesses over humanity, right? In the Quran. So just anytime anyone's suffering or struggling anywhere, it should matter to us, and we should be willing to speak the truth courageously about it.
100%. 100%. Sister Saadia, thank you so very much. Producer Kashif.
Before we end here, we're at the top of the hour.
Yes.
So one thing for our children, what is something we learn from the people of Palestine, from our brothers and sisters and our children there, that we can convey to our children as a lesson? Like when we look at our brothers, what's something Sister Saadia, Brother Mushtaq, that comes to mind that what we want to instill in our children and use Palestine as an example?
For me, unshakable faith. And gratitude under even the most horrific circumstances. Always being grateful. We can feel sad, but we should never say anything that would displease Allah. We say Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil, and we trust in Allah's plan fully, with full conviction that there will be a day of judgment. And anyone who's responsible for perpetrating this, they will be held accountable. And likewise, we're going to be held accountable for whatever small good we did, whatever limited capacity we have. Whatever we did, even if the only thing we do is talk to our own children, we are going to be rewarded for that. So not to feel like the whole problem is yours to solve, but yes, if we're going to take them as our example, unshakable faith and gratitude under all circumstances.
Hope and resilience. Hope and resilience. And that, let me reverse it. Resilience. Because the people of Palestine are the most resilient people on the face of this planet right now.
Yeah.
So let's not let them down. Let's give them back. They have that hope. I'm eating my words. They have hope. But let's do our part to continue and give them greater hope.
Yeah.
If we want to use, as Producer Kashif is positing, them as an example, if we want to use them as an example, then let's give them greater hope by continuing to keep up the pressure, to keep
Mhm.
up the momentum, to keep up the peaceful rallies. Again, I will say time and time again, in that country and within that area and the occupation and the war and the killing, it is simply all about peace. Simply all about peace and nothing else. That is the one common thing everyone who is coming out to every peaceful rally across the entire globe, that is all everyone wants here and now. So continue the pressure, continue the pressure, continue the pressure. Producer Kashif, anything else? All right, I've been given the thumbs up. Sister Saadia, thank you so very much for coming out
Well, thank you for having me.
giving us all these tips to help self-regulate. Because as we've already established, a strong parent or a mindful parent,
Yeah.
a parent trying their best, especially during these trying times,
Mhm.
that can only help a child who is trying to navigate the waters during
Yes.
these trying times. Because children, like my own eldest daughter, they want to express themselves. Let's make sure they have that institution backing them, the schools backing them, the police backing them, so that they can express their support. And I will reiterate again until I am blue in the face. There are many organizations that are working in the background tirelessly around the clock, namely NCCM Canada, Justice for All Canada. Look them up on the website. And you can file an incident report if you need to, because as we've already said at the top of this podcast, at the top of this live stream, Islamophobia is on the rise. Anti-Palestinian racism is on the rise. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. Again, people simply want peace. So don't let up. Don't let up. Don't let up. Thank you for watching this live stream. This has been an emotional one.
Yeah.
Sister Saadia, thank you. For the people of Palestine, if this does somehow reach you, our duas are with you.
Yes.
We are all with you. And
No, let's also emphasize we need to keep making dua.
you took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Duas are everything. Duas are everything. I'm rarely at a loss for words, but thank you, Sister Saadia, for filling that. Thank you so very much, everyone, for watching. And if you can, please do forward this live stream, forward this YouTube video so that others can learn about how to grapple with their emotions as parents and what they can do for their children. Jazakallah khair for watching.